Well, thank you for getting that set up. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our workshop, Medicaid, Medicare, Lions, Tigers, and Bears. We are so happy that you've joined us today, and we're excited to provide you with more information and resources that will give you a deeper understanding of us at Clinkscales and our services. We're excited to see you in person, and then we're also excited to Randy and I are sitting in our office here in Hayes and share information with you while you're there together in St. Francis. So, my name is Emily, and I'm the marketing director for Clinkscales Elder Law Practice. And we do have our main office located here in Hayes, and then our other office in Wichita, but we do serve clients and families throughout the entire state of Kansas. And we're able to connect through in-person meetings, phone calls, and also lots of Zoom computer meetings like this as well. So Lexi, I would just like to say that we're liking to invite you all to interrupt Randy with any questions that you may have. You can leave yourself unmuted and just kind of like shout out and interrupt with questions. Or if you want to put them in the chat box, I can monitor that and then interrupt with those questions as well. So however you want to handle that is great. And Randy will be happy to answer any of those questions that you have. So without any further ado, I'll just go ahead and hand it over to our attorney and president, Randy Clinkscales, to go ahead and get us started this afternoon.
And Lexi, can you hear us okay?
Can you hear us now?
Yes, can you hear us okay?
Yes.
Okay. So, well, welcome everybody. I'm Randy Clinkscales. I am an elder care attorney in Hayes. As Emily said, we practice over almost all the state, primarily the western 2/3, with offices in Hayes and Wichita. So today, Lexi asked me to talk about how to pay for care and draw some distinctions between Medicare and Medicaid. I will tell you, I stole this slideshow from my partner, Jenny Walters. And I had to do some modifications. She's obviously a lot more talented than I am at creating these funny slides. So again, Alexia, if you have any problems hearing me, please let me know, okay?
Okay.
All right. So let's get started. Who are we? We're an elder care practice. These are the four attorneys that we have in our office. Brandon in the upper left-hand corner is located in Wichita, in our Wichita office. Jenny and I and Adam are all located in the Hayes office. I've been practicing in Hayes since 1983. I transitioned to elder care in the office to elder care about 18 years ago. Lexi, did they get a copy of the slideshow?
Yes.
Great. The slideshow gets into a lot of details. We're not going to get into those details quite as much, just because it's fairly complicated. But I wanted you to have the information. So really three topics today. One is how to privately pay for care, and then how Medicaid works, and then what does Medicare cover? How does Medicaid work? What does Medicare cover, and how does it differ from Medicaid? So here's the situation. What happens is that as we grow older, we need to start planning for the possibility that we may not be able to stay alone, or we may even have to transition to some type of facility or some place where we can get assistance. And just to let you know by way of background, I got into doing this out of necessity. I was involved in uh, becoming a caregiver for my grandmother very unexpectedly when my mom passed away. And so I took care of my grandmother for about 10 years. And I don't want to blow that out of proportion. It was a real pleasure when I was taking care of her. And so I learned a lot about what I'm going to be talking about. Most of our clients, what we try to do with our clients that are anytime they're dealing with a chronic illness, is that we actually have what we call care coordinators that start working with that client to try to keep them at home as long as possible. Just to let you know, on my journey with my grandmother, for 4 or 5 years, I was able to keep her at home. She actually transitioned to hospice care. She was living in Fort Worth, and I moved her to Kansas. And in Kansas, I got her into an assisted living facility. And actually, after she moved into the assisted living facility, they kicked her off of hospice because she got so much better. I'm not advertising for assisted living, but just advertising for getting good care and meeting my grandmother at the level that she needed care and so forth. So um, that really transitioned my practice. So when I was working with my grandmother, the question was that as I was trying to take care of her, is how was I going to pay for that? And my grandmother did not have a lot of resources. Um, she had her home and some, just to show you how long ago this was. She used to live off her CDs when CDs used to make money. And so that was really her savings. She was drawing Social Security. Um, and so it was a lot of management of her resources so that she could stay at home. So when we're talking about privately paying, what does that mean? That means that we are looking at um, using our own resources to privately pay for care. And that could come in several forms. That could mean cash, paying for cash, um, paying by cash for care. Again, I think a lot of it has to do with what type of care are we trying to pay for? Are we trying to pay for at-home care? Are we trying to pay for um, care in a independent living or assisted living or a nursing home? Um, a private resource, if you will, is Medicare. And so I will tell you that when my grandmother was living in Fort Worth, we were using Medicare quite a bit. How? Through hospice. And then she had had a heart attack, and so she was having a lot of home care. So we were tapping in to Medicare home health benefits. Um, and some of her stuff was not, obviously her hospital stay and so forth. Part of that was covered by Medicare, but we also tapped in. She had a supplemental insurance policy. Actually, she had a different type of policy, but we were able to tap into that to help pay for that care. Sometimes when I have a client that comes to me and maybe they're healthy, and maybe we have a window of opportunity, sometimes we'll talk about trying to get long-term care insurance. And we could talk for a whole hour about long-term care insurance. I kind of go both ways on it. It can be quite expensive. Um, Sometimes the premiums go up and it makes it unaffordable. Um, Sometimes we look at some what I call hybrid products that are a combination of life insurance and long-term care insurance. Um, some of those policies are designed so that if you ever have to go on Medicaid, that your premium, your uh, spend down for Medicaid purposes is reduced so that you can protect more assets. So we'd like to have a conversation with our clients about what does long-term care insurance look like, and is it proper for that family. Also, sometimes, and we've done this, there's a way to convert life insurance into long-term care insurance. There's, again, a bunch of hoops we have to jump through, but uh, typically, if I have a client that is near the end of life, we can convert a life insurance policy into cash. And then as long as we use that cash for long-term care costs, and that could be like in-home care, that sort of thing, then that is a non-taxable event. Once in a while, we actually, as part of our planning process, may designate certain resources that are going to be sold to pay for care. So let me give you an example. I had a client with 3/4 of ground, uh, uh, land rich, cash poor. So what we did is we put 2/4 into a special type of irrevocable trust, and then held out the 3/4 to help pay for care. And so again, what we were able to do in that case was to protect the farm, but understanding that we were going to have to sell a quarter if we needed long-term care. The other one that we get real concerned about is that when somebody does go into long-term care, we may need to start dividing or they're headed that way. We may need to look at what's called dividing the assets, or a division of assets. And that's going to kind of get us into the Medicaid side. Before I go on, any questions about privately paying for care? Okay, let me go on then. Okay, so we're going to talk about Medicaid here. And what I want you to understand is that the Medicaid rules are terribly complex, and they're based on a federal rule. They're federal rules. There's also so the way Medicaid works, let me kind of go to that. In Kansas, about half of Medicaid is paid for by the federal government. The other half is paid by the state government. There's federal legislation, but then the state passes laws and regulations and rules to enact and administer the program. So the state of Kansas is in charge of administering the Medicaid rules, the Medicaid program in Kansas. To add a little bit of more complexity to that, sometimes Medicaid issues letter opinions. So as an example, technically, if you read the law about well, I think it's about $7,000 or $9,000 can be put into a funeral plan and be protected from Medicaid. Actually, Medicaid, the people have issued a letter that says you can put more than that into your funeral plan, provided you meet certain requirements and it's irrevocable and it's reasonable and that sort of stuff. So it actually expands the rule favorably. Uh, the other one that we run into, so I have three people in my office that do nothing but Medicaid. Um, and they communicate every day with CanCare and KDHE and those officials. We keep up quite a diary of that contact because sometimes they will tell us this is how we're interpreting a certain rule. And so then we can rely on that email exchange. So if later on, so I'll give you an example. We had a client that sold some land to a family member for 80% of value. Well, under Medicaid rules, that was a gift at that time. They later on changed the rule so that you could not sell it for 80%. But we had an email exchange where they gave us permission and okayed that sell for 80%. So again, we carved out an exception in that particular case so that would protected our clients and so they could qualify for Medicaid. So all I'm telling you is it just kind of it's a minefield out there. And many times I feel like it's very arbitrary and shifting. So what is Medicaid? So Medicaid the laws were passed in 1965 during the Johnson administration. The original Medicaid was designed to pay for long-term care and health coverage for people 65 and older, provided they met certain asset and income tests. Since then, as you can imagine, there have been multiple amendments, additions, expansions, and contractions to the Medicaid laws. And so probably the biggest thing is, in my mind, is that there's more protection for a spouse than there used to be. There is a lot of what's called the look back period has been lengthened. It used to be when I applied for Medicaid, they could look back for 24 months to see if there had been any type of gifting. That increased to 36 months, and then it increased to 60 months. So right now, the rule is it's a 5-year look back. Trusts were really attacked. And so we have to be really careful about using trusts and what type of trust or will work and not work and meet those rules. So let's talk about in Medicaid, there are exempt assets. And so, basically, you can have $2,000, you can have a home, a vehicle, a funeral plan, and your personal property. There's some additions there. Sometimes you can treat as exempt or non-countable a farm or a business or a rental property. Also, the well spouse's retirement, if it's set up correctly, we can prevent that from being a capital resource. So let me go to the next slide. Really, everything else is countable. So CDs, checking, life insurance value over $1,500, the applicant or the ill spouse's retirement plan, any real estate that's not income producing, more than one vehicle, assets that are in a trust, um, and income from a farm unless it's set up correctly. Any questions before I go on to the resource assessment? So the first step in Medicaid is what's called the resource assessment. And the resource assessment allows you is when you look at the total resources, what resources do you have? And this is really applicable in situations where there is a married couple. The resource assessment is the date that the person went into long-term care and has been in long-term care for 30 or more days. There are ways to piggyback onto an earlier date when there was a hospital stay and then admission to into the facility, into the nursing home or adult care home. So again, if April 1, somebody goes to the hospital is there for, there has to be a 3-day stay, and then is discharged, and now it's we're April 16th. Come May 1, we can actually go all the way back to April 1 and have a snapshot date. And why is that important? Because we get to look at the value of the resources on that date. And when we're going to divide them, we get to look at the value on that date. So if there has been some payment for long-term care or something like that, we get to bring that back into the equation. There are some special rules about home and community-based services. And so sometimes we can actually create a snapshot date, even when a person's still living at home, if their care needs would arise to the appropriate level. And again, that's just kind of a little thing that we look at doing, and so that we can start dividing resources even while they're at home. And why is that? Because many times people that are living at home are paying for outside care. And so we want to be able to pay for that care utilizing the resources of the ill spouse and protecting the resources of the well spouse. Just a warning here about trust. Generally, if you have a revocable trust, you're not going to be able to qualify for Medicaid. So we have to be able to get out of that trust. It's just a rule in Kansas. So if I have my home in a revocable trust, which I do, if I were to get sick and my wife wanted to apply for Medicaid, she would have to have the ability to get that house out of the trust so that she can qualify me for Medicaid. So that's a very technical rule, but it's a rule that they harp on all the time. Again, there are some special type of trusts that don't count, that are unavailable, and we're going to touch on those here in a little bit.
Hey, Randy,
Yeah.
there's quite a bit of feedback on their side. Would you like me to go ahead and mute them until they have questions and then they can unmute and ask those?
Sure.
Okay. I'm just going to go ahead and mute you guys. Lexi, when you have questions, you can unmute or put in the chat box, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, and so Lexi, if there's anything you need me to repeat, I'm happy to do that, but I'll keep going on until you tell me. Okay. And Lexi, if you need to put something in the chat box, that's good too. So let's talk about what the exemptions are. Again, we're going to use an example. This is a family that's got the home of $150,000. A wife has an IRA of $100,000. There's a car, there's personal property, and there's farm ground. So all of that under our scenario is going to be a non-countable or exempt. And I say, I really hate the term exempt because there is something called estate recovery. And I think many times that's misleading. So if a person goes on Medicaid and has a home, Medicaid does have a right to put a lien against that home. Now, if it's a married couple, there's some things we can do to stop that from happening. But I do want you to know that is a, we always talk with our clients about what does that mean? What does that mean in the end? What about estate recovery? And how does that affect them? So let's go back to our example. Our accountable resources in this case are a checking, savings, some life insurance cash value, Edward Jones account, and a Ford truck. So altogether, we have up $100,000 of accountable resources. So if we have a married couple, this is what would happen. We would divide the resources between the well spouse and the ill spouse. And the ill spouse, I'm always referring to the person that's going into some type of long-term care. So the well spouse will keep $50,000, and the ill spouse, they have to spend their $50,000 down to $2,000. So what does it have to be spent on? It does not have to be spent on the ill spouse. It can be spent on the well spouse. So as an example, it can be used to fix up the house, those types of things, pay off debt. So the point is, it either has to be spent on the ill spouse or the well spouse. Another rule I want you to be aware of. So if the rule says that the well spouse gets 1/2 of all of the accountable resources, but there's a limit. The 1/2 cannot exceed $154,140. So that's as of today. That number changes every year. In addition, the well spouse is entitled to a minimum of $30,828. Keep in mind that what I see, and we kind of go back, what I see is that people wait too long to divide the resources. And so if they come to me and they spent the resources down, way down, I can't undo that. I can't get the money back. And so that's why we always want to do the division as soon as we can so that we can maximize these numbers, maximize the 30,000 or the 154,000. We want to maximize that as much as possible. So here's an example where we have $400,000 of countable resources. The well spouse is only going to be able to keep $154,140. And the ill spouse is going to have to spend down $245,860. And we're going to kind of get into some other solutions. But let's go an example the other way. Now we have $30,000 in this particular example. So while we divide the resources, the well spouse, again, remember that minimum of $30,000 over here, that well spouse is going to get the whole $30,000, and the ill spouse has zero money that they have to spend down. So again, the ill spouse is going to qualify when they're down to $2,000. That's what we're trying to get that ill spouse down to so that we can qualify for Medicaid. Now, options for various assets. How can we spend it down? Again, as I mentioned to you, here's an example. We can spend it on home repairs, a funeral plan, the nursing home, pay off debt, legal services. We can purchase exempt assets like a car. I've actually had clients purchase land or a rental property. Sometimes we can do something called a Medicaid qualified annuity. Let me just show you an example here. Let's go back to $100,000 of countable resources. The well spouse gets $50,000. The ill spouse gets $50,000. So we don't have any repairs to the house that we need to fix up. And so we can either pay for care till we get down to $2,000, or what we do a lot of times is we try to give the well spouse some more income. And we do that through what's called a Medicaid qualified annuity. In this particular case, Jenny set it up so that $50,000 was paid out to the well spouse over 24 months and gave the well spouse an income of $2,083 a month for 24 months. And so why do we do that? Because again, you kind of understand this is kind of it for that well spouse. This is for the well spouse. This is all they're going to be able to keep. And so we've converted a resource into a income stream, and therefore, as soon as we do that, then the ill spouse is going to qualify for Medicaid. And I know that's pretty technical, but it's a tool that we like to use when we're worried about the income stream of the well spouse. So our goal is to preserve money for the well spouse and provide a source of income. That annuity has a whole bunch of requirements, 5 different requirements it has to meet. And we have to get what's called refusal letters. And again, I don't want to get into all the technical things there. The other one that I always think kind of a neat tool is sometimes I'll have a client that has, so let me kind of go down to the bottom there. Have a client that's got $100,000 life insurance policy. The ill spouse does, and maybe their the cash value is $5,000. They can't qualify for Medicaid with that. They have to cash it out. But there are some options. Again, one is to cash it out. One, you can assign it to a funeral. Well, then that's going to generate, $100,000. But sometimes what I do, if I have a client that maybe I don't think has much of a life expectancy, is I assign it to Medicaid, and then Medicaid, when my client passes away, gets reimbursed. What the rest of it goes to the family. Sometimes, many times, we assign smaller policies like a $10,000 policy to a funeral home, and that makes it not exempt, makes it exempt, so it's not countable So anyway, there's a lot of options that we can look at with life insurance cash value. Talk about some additional options. There are some special rules about transfers to disabled family members. You can, in our example, we could actually transfer money to a disabled child, and then that resource becomes not countable, and that's not a gift. Again, there's some special rules there. Sometimes I'm working on a case right now where mom or son lives with mom, taking care of her mom, has dementia, but for sons living there, mom would not be able to stay at home. And if we continue that for 2 years, and again, we've got to jump through some hoops, it's okay for mom to transfer that home to son and that not be considered a gift. So I've not really talked to you a little bit about that gifting problem. So let's just talk about that for a moment. If I apply for a client, if I apply for Medicaid today, so this is April 16th, Medicaid has the right to look back through all the transactions that my client has made, my client or the spouse has made in the past 5 years. And anything over $49.99 in a month that is a gift can incur a penalty. So Medicaid would have the right to look back and look at Randy and Barb's gifting to the church, and potentially, now there's an exception for churches, and I won't go into that, but they could go back and look at, Randy and Barb gave money to their grandson, that sort of thing, and they add up all those gifts. And so let's assume that over the last 5 years, I've given away $75,000 to my grandkids and to my kids. They would divide that number by a divisor, which is about $7,500. And they're saying, well, you can't qualify, even though you're out of money, you're not going to qualify for Medicaid for 10 months. So 75,000 divided by $7,500 equals 10. So they're not going to pay for 10 months of care. So we have to be very, very careful about gifting. But again, there are some exceptions to that gifting rule if it's like to a disabled child, a special self-set. So sometimes we have clients that need long-term care, but they're not 65. There's ways we can set up a special needs trust, a self-settled special needs trust for that person without incurring any type of penalty. There is something called a patient liability, but before I get to that, let me talk to you a little bit about one other thing that I did not cover in the slideshow. So when I have a married couple, and let's assume they're both on Social Security, what Medicaid says is the well spouse ought to have about $2,400 of income. And so if the wells, and let me back up a little bit. When you go on Medicaid, Medicaid gets your Social Security. They get your income. You get to keep $62. The rest of it goes towards your care. And the difference between your care cost and your income is covered by Medicaid. And again, that's a gross oversimplification. When I have a married couple, we can actually move income from the ill spouse to the well spouse. So if the well spouse has an income of about $2,400 minimum, but there's, and then you figure out what's called the patient liability. But I wanted you to know that about the income, because I think that's real important, that, it's important to me that the well spouse has income, enough income to live on. So that's why a lot of times we look at the annuity, we look at some other things like that. Typically, before I apply for Medicaid for the ill spouse, I'm going to start transferring property over to the well spouse. Now, you heard me talk about the 5-year look back, but that 5-year look back does not apply to transfers between spouses. And so a lot of times I'm going to transfer to the well spouse any kind of income producing property, the house and that sort of thing. The next 2 slides have to do with the this slide has to do with the Medicaid patient liability. Again, it's really technical. My staff does this. I'm not going to attempt to explain it to you, but this is how we figure out what does this mean. This tells us what does the ill spouse have to pay. How much does the well spouse get to keep? And then this particular chart is a chart about what type of resources, what type of income does the well spouse get to keep? So I talked to you a little bit about the $2,400 that actually can go up if there's some excess shelter expenses and some things like that. But we go through that calculation to figure out how much of the ill spouse's income we want to allocate to the well spouse. Let's talk about a single person for a moment. This is a person with a home and then accountable resources of $200,000. Again, that person will qualify for Medicaid once they're down to $2,000. So what are our options? How do we spend that money down? Well, I always want to be sure that we've paid the funeral, that if there's any back taxes or any debt, we get all that paid for. We can certainly use it for care, particularly if we have somebody that's trying to stay at home, or maybe they're trying to stay in assisted living. Sometimes there are strategies that will allow us to protect some of that money through something called a gifted annuity. We can generally protect about 60%. But we also want to look at are there disabled family members? Was there a child that took care of, my example I gave you a while ago, a child is taking care of his mom? Are there payback trusts we can set up for somebody? So we kind of go through all of that analysis with the client, rather than just doing nothing. I mean, I don't want the family to be burdened by a person who's now deceased, that's got a home with back taxes and a funeral expense, and how to do all of that. Applying for Medicaid, I tell people, as soon as you enter a facility, you need to start thinking about what does Medicaid allow me to do. I even, if somebody is trying to stay in the home, we talk about maybe doing a division of assets at that moment. You submit the application when you're spent down. The rule is that the application can be retroactive, I think 90 days. We have to pay for long-term care while the application is pending. So as an example, even though we're spent down, we'll still owe for long-term care cost. And so we'll calculate internally what is the patient obligation, because we don't want to get behind on that, because that just digs a hole for our clients. Have to be prepared for delays. KDHE and CanCare is notoriously slow, and we have to be prepared for appeals. Just along those lines, my staff is rather exacting in their Medicaid application process. And the reason they are is that, delays and appeals are just very frustrating to the clients. I mean, those things come up, I understand, but the more T's we cross, and the more I's we dot, the more upfront we are with Medicaid about any kind of problems. We just find our success rate is much higher than most other people, or anybody I know of anyway. Any questions on Medicaid before I talk about the differences between Medicaid and Medicare? Okay. I like the skeleton waiting here. So, let's talk about Medicaid versus Medicare. They're both government programs that cover health care costs for different populations. Medicare is for people who are over 65 or have a disability. That's really the only qualification. Medicaid qualification is resource-based and income-based. In other words, if you have too many resources or too much income, you're not going to qualify for Medicaid. Medicare has premiums, co-pays, co-insurance, and deductibles. Medicaid is generally free or nearly free, but there is a state recovery that I mentioned earlier. Medicaid covers some benefits that Medicare does not, such as nursing home care and personal care services. Medicaid varies by state, while Medicare is the same nationwide. One thing I did not touch on is sometimes we can also tap into something called VA pension, which is just another layer of possible compensation. Again, VA pension is asset and income sensitive, but it is a tax-free payment, and there is no estate recovery. So it's a benefit to the veteran. Again, there's some qualifications that we have to jump through, but it's a good program. I think we've got about 70 families that are using Medicaid, VA pension benefits. Medicare coverage consists of different parts. And some of you are very familiar. Part A covers inpatient hospital, skilled nursing facility care, hospice, and some home health services. Part B, on the other hand, covers outpatient services, doctor visits, preventative care, and some home health services. Part C is Medicare Advantage programs. I just got back from a conference. We are now approaching that Medicare Advantage programs are almost 50% of all Medicare plans. I think there's some new regulations coming down because of some of the practices of Medicare Advantage programs, but it is a growing program. And then Part D is your prescription drug program. And then there's Advantage plans, as I mentioned. How much does Medicare cost? Most people, if they've been in working, Part A is free. Part Part B has monthly premiums. The premiums are income based. And so the higher your income, the higher your premium could be. So one thing I always caution people about, and again, go back to the scenario I told you earlier, where the young man, the son is living with mom. They actually had sold some property. Well, they had a lot of capital gains, and that is income related. And so it pushed up her Medicare premiums for at least a year. So that was quite an unpleasant surprise that they received. So a lot of times we want to counsel people about how do we avoid that. Part D is, again, the drug premium. Again, that premium can actually go up because of your income. And then Medicare Advantage, and then supplemental coverage programs. So will Medicare pay for my nursing home stay? Yes, with a qualifying stay, but it does not pay for long-term care. And we always talk about the 3-day rule, the 3 midnight rule. It must be admitted to the hospital versus observation status. And then if you're discharged after the 3-day rule, discharged to a skilled facility within 30 days, then Medicare will pay for that for a period of time. And again, I'm not going to go into all those rules, but you have to need skilled care. Medicare Advantage plans require prior authorization for skilled care. And again, I'm going to talk to you about an exception. Medicare does not pay for long-term care, room and board, services not deemed medically necessary, a private room, ambulance transportation not deemed medically necessary, a care facility, care provided at a facility that is not Medicare certified. There are some new rules coming down about Medicare Advantage prior authorization, and I'm including that in the slideshow. Probably one that I think is really big, that I've been talking about for 10 years now, a case called Jimmo versus Sebelius. It used to be that there was a belief that you had to have improvement in order for Medicare to continue. Jimmo said that that's not true, that services can be scaled and covered even when the individual has plateaued. And services are for maintenance only. And so it really expanded. So a lot of times we'll find it necessary to appeal a Medicare termination when it's the Medicare is allowing the person to maintain where they are. I highlighted this stuff in red just so I remember to talk to you about it. Again, the skilled nursing services are covered where such skilled nursing services are necessary to maintain the patient's current condition or prevent or slow further deterioration. And so that's kind of the theme of Jimmo. Now, let me see if there are any questions at this point. Lexi? While Lexi's coming up there, let me just talk to you a little bit about, I think that there's some information there if you would like to have a consultation with our office. There's a yellow sheet. If you will fill that out and turn that into Lexi, she'll send that on to us. What we'll do is we'll actually have a phone call with you first to be sure that we can help you. And if we can, then we will schedule a meeting anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes in person or by Zoom or by telephone. and then talk to you about what's going on and what are you hoping to happen. The consultation is free. We've scheduled 8 appointments. We've reserved 8 appointments. Just fill out your name and your contact information. And if you want us to, if you're going to be contacting us or you want us to contact you, but we'll need your telephone number. So Lexi and Emily, I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
If you're a widow, they can basically take whatever's left.
I'm sorry. Repeat the question.
She said if you're a widow, they can basically take whatever's left. That's her question.
Yeah, and so again, let me jump back to a slide. So if you look at this slide, in this case, there was about $200,000. There are ways that we can transfer that to like a disabled child and the like. The other one is that sometimes there's what's called a gift strategy that allows us to transfer about 60% of your resources to whoever it is that you choose, and we can protect that 60%. So there are still, if you will, planning opportunities for single people. Does that answer your question?
I guess.
It's rather technical, but what I want you to understand is that even if you're a single person, there are still things we can do to, get a plan in place.
But what's it going to cost to start out with, and during each month or after you join this thing?
Well, generally, it's just a flat fee up front. And so once we meet with you and we know what's going on, we'll tell you what that is according to how complicated it is. But then after that meeting, then we'll tell you exactly what it is.
That flat fee should pretty much be common, shouldn't it? Or are you basing it on the person's wealth to begin with?
It is income based. Yes.
Well, and again, it may be, so as an example, if you came in and had $100,000 and that was it, that's not a terribly complicated plan. But if you came in and you had a farm and a home and some investments, then the plan becomes more complicated. Or if you have a child that has special needs and you're wanting to set up a plan for that child, then again, that adds a layer of complexity to what needs to be done.
But basically, you're looking at a child that has a difficulty, not of your normal children.
Well, again, if you're trying to set up a special needs trust, yes, that child has to have some issues. But many times we don't have a child with special needs, and there's still a way that we can protect about 60% or so of the other resources.
But basically, a lot of these facilities we go to is owned by a county, and we're paying taxes and supporting the facility to begin with. And then we're supposed to give the majority of our earnings or income to the facility or whatever.
Right. Once a person goes on if they go on Medicaid, well, and again, I think that if you look at it this way, you can privately pay until you've exhausted your resources. And once you've exhausted your resources, then your income, with the exception of $62, will go towards your patient obligation, and then Medicaid's going to cover the remainder of it.
But basically, we've worked all our lives, and our children is more important. That would like to see them have some of the stuff that we've worked for, whether they're disabled or healthy.
Correct. That's correct. And I understand that. And that's why I'm saying, even if they're healthy, there are still some things we can do to protect some of your resources. Any other questions?
Sounds to me like we're better off to take advantage of whatever.
Could you talk a little more about the gift strategy to preserve 60%?
Yeah, in 2006, there was a law called the Deficit Reduction Act that allowed us to do something called Medicaid qualified annuities. And so, and again, it's fairly technical, but basically, so if I was a single person and Emily was my child, or whatever, I would transfer away a portion of my resources, and generally it's about 60%. I would then get hit with a penalty for transferring away those resources. And with the other 40%, we would buy this Medicaid qualified annuity, which would pay for my care for that time period that I was disqualified. So let's assume that I was disqualified for 4 months. The annuity would pay for 4 months of care. And at the end of that, the remaining 60% would be protected. And I would qualify for Medicaid. It's very technical. I'm sorry. No real way for me to make it simple. Any other questions?
I would also just like to mention that on that yellow sheet, there's the option to receive the free book that Randy helped write. So even if you're not sure if you want a free consultation now, you can put your information in to get the free book, or if you want to get our newsletters, just so that way you stay up to date on what's going on in the industry, what's going on with our office, if we have any special deals, anything like that. If you fill in your information, I'm very happy to add you to that newsletter list as well.
Thank you.
And then just so you know, Lexi, I did record this, so I can go ahead and email you the YouTube link of the recorded video. So if there are people who didn't show up, or if the attendees who are here today want to rewatch to take notes or share with their kids or anything, you'll have that available as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for virtually having us today. We really appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks. We'll talk later.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.